So, Lee, you are considered one of the great arranger and orchestrators in the business. And a lot of people wonder, does a composer write the music? And if so, what does the orchestrator do? Talk about your work as an orchestrator and a composer.
Orchestration is a very, very, very refined art form. You really have to understand not only how the instruments are played and what they best sound like played certain things, but you have to understand the technical side of it. I'll tell you a perfect example. When I was first studying, Henry Lasker said, write a 3-minute brass piece. So I went home and wrote a 3-minute brass piece. Came the next day, he put it up on the piano, played through it. He said, this is very nice. He said, when do they breathe? And I was in a state of shock. And I realized, so ever since then, you think about things like that. You say, okay, don't forget to let the brass players breathe every now and then. So you learn those tricks. You learn that maybe over here, these guys get an eighth rest and so forth, that kind of stuff. But I think the secret of orchestration is you do have to hear it. You have to hear what it's going to sound like. You can look at the page and you can kind of know what it's going to sound like. And I think that's half the battle right there. It's a little different than composing, because composing, you can imagine the music. And I often do. I often think about maybe a thematic idea or something like that. I might walk around with it for a while. Then I finally might go to the keyboard and try it out. But I haven't thought yet about what's going to play it. Then you start thinking about, well, what's going to sound good? What part of the orchestra is going to sound good? So now it becomes a whole different thing. A composer is one thing, and an orchestrator is like a painter in a strange way, because you now paint colors into the composition. And the truth of the matter is you can hear the same piece orchestrated by different people. And it's still the same piece of music, but it all of a sudden takes on different personalities. You can go do that with Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition,
Ravel
and you could hear the different orchestrations of it. And same thing with Handel's Messiah. The difference between what Mozart added to it, what Handel did originally, is quite fascinating.
Everyone in the film, and especially television, works with an orchestrator because of the time element. You just don't have time to get it all done. So when you work with an orchestrator, how do you communicate with the orchestrator to make sure that what your musical vision is becomes a reality with someone else involved?
And the occasions that I had to work with an orchestrator because of time constraints, I worked with the very brilliant Ira Hershon, who's a master genius of the orchestra. But I would give him sometimes 4 lines or 6-line sketches. I would mark on it. I'd say, strings are going to do this. I'd like an oboe solo over here. I would give him some details, and then he would go from there. But I love the story he told me that some famous composer one time handed him a lead sheet and said, "Make America Cry." That was his instructions. So it can be very widespread, but I'm old school, so I tend to put in the sketch what I want, kind of. And then he may bring certain touches to it, which I think are marvelous, or certain voicings, whatever. An orchestrator can do that, but most of the time I've had to orchestrate my own music. So,
some composing questions. In your opinion, what is the most important skill that a film composer must have?
I think it's a dramatic sense, the sense of what the moment needs. And the admiration we have for certain film composers, both some of the new ones and some of the older traditional ones, is what they pick for that moment, or how they bring that moment forward. And I think that instinct right there in that moment, that's where they really, really, really make it. Then from that point, things can grow. But it's marvelous sometimes when you go in to see a film and there's something there, you say, wow, that's great. What is that? That's wonderful, And that's probably that moment of creation of the film composer, being able to just find that whatever that kernel is that makes it all grow from there.
But you're also asked to walk a very fine line between what you're seeing and feeling dramatically,
right.
and the input that you get from the director, maybe the producer. How do you balance that? How do you approach that?
Well, you have to listen to them. They've been living with the film a lot longer than you have, and they've got certain instincts about it. And I found that some directors, some producers really have a good sense of what they're looking for in the film, and others are just not sure. Harvey Hart, when I worked on East of Eden, the miniseries, he said to me, okay, there's two themes in this. There's the good theme and there's the evil theme. He said, I'm going to Hawaii. Have a great time. 3 months later, I got a note from him saying, great score, thank you. But on other occasions, I was doing a feature film one time in Europe, and I sat next to the director. We were going through the film, watching it for the first time. And there was a certain character that would come into the film, and every time the character would come in, the director would go, and he would do that every time. I said, he wants that.
Contrabassoon.
He wants that. Well, I wound up, I have some low string thing, but I mean, and literally that interval, that pattern, and that's what he wanted, and he loved it. When he heard it, he's like, yeah, I like that. Another time, the movie The Beastmaster, the producer said to me, he says, Lee, I want drums. Okay. He kept saying, drums. So when I went to Rome to record that score, I made sure the opening of the film, and I asked the contractor of the orchestra, would you ask the percussionist to get the biggest drums they can out of their percussion library? They walked in with drums that I swore had marched with the Roman armies. These things, I had never seen anything like. They were huge, and they were old and everything, and they pounded on them, and they had this great sound. So we started the film with that, and the producer had a big grin on his face. So you have to listen to the filmmakers. You have to, and I've said to the directors, he'll say to me, I don't know anything about music. I said, then don't talk to me about music. Talk to me about the film. What were you doing dramatically? What were you after in this scene? Is there a feeling that you want? And they'll suddenly say to you, well, right here, she's thinking this, but she's feeling this. I say, aha, maybe the music can show that, you see? Mm-hmm. So it's very important, I think. It's a collaborative effort. Film is completely collaborative. And I think the art of it is knowing how to assimilate into those situations. And that's sometimes the trick.
So you've gotten the input from the director. You've sat with him or her in a spotting session.
Right.
And you've talked about the feel and all this sort of thing. And you go home, and someone arrives at your door, a messenger, with a packet. And in that packet are CDs from the director.
Yeah.
And you look at the film, and he has also delivered the film with a temp track.
Yes. That's very rough.
As a composer, how do you deal with temp tracks? And do you like them? Do you not like them?
Well, they're a double-edged sword.
Explain, first of all, what a temp track is.
A temp track is, they have the film. They have now laid into it their favorite recordings of what they think the score should be. And you can sit there, and sometimes their ideas are very good, and it might help you. Other times you think, oh my gosh, that's horrible. And so now you have to try to wean them from that idea. I have a friend, an editor, who calls it temp addiction. I can go to the theater now and watch a new film that's just come out, and I know what they tempt the movie with because I hear the composer struggling to copy what was done, but avoid a lawsuit. And I find that very discouraging. And I think the best would be to just completely wipe the slate clean and start over. But the temp track is a good shorthand for the director to say, this is kind of what I want. This is the feeling that I want here. This is the feeling. But then they need to be able to walk away from it a little bit and give you your room. They don't always do that. Mm-hmm. And I've had it said to me, no, I want it just like that. And you.
What is your response when
you have a good lawyer? Well, the trick is how close can you get? It's a tricky one. I remember in Mr. Mom, the dinner scene when he's making dinner for her, the director wanted Claire de Lune playing on the record player. but they couldn't get the rights to it. You know why they couldn't get the rights to it? Because the lawyer in Paris for the Debussy estate was the same lawyer in Paris for the Ravel estate, and he was still angry about the movie 10 and the way
Bolero.
they used Bolero.
Yes, yeah.
So when Hollywood came and called and said, "Can we have Claire de Lune?" he said, "No." So the director was very downcast. He said, "I love that piece. I said, "There's an old composition trick that we learned in school, which is you can write an original work in the style of." Mm-hmm. So I took the Mr. Mom theme and arranged it like Claire de Lune. So on comes these impressionist string chords, and descending and this and that, but it's Mr. Mom. And the director was happy because it gave him the illusion of Claire de Lune, but we avoided a lawsuit.
Is there a difference in your approach to writing feature film music as opposed to writing music for television?
It's a very difficult one to answer because in either case it's film, so you're still dealing with film. Maybe, I think, going back to the days of Glenn Larson and some of those veteran producers and Aaron Spelling and everything, their thing was always that in television, people can get up and walk out of the room or change channels. In the theater, they're there. They're going to sit with you through the movie. So in a way, in television, there's a little more pressure to maybe have more music because they want to keep things kind of going and keep the tension going and keep it. Glenn Larson once said to me, he said, no, I want a cue there. The music tells the audience, that lets them know when to look up, And I thought that was a crazy thing to say. But I began to understand that what he was saying is pay attention, something's going to happen. Now, in a feature film, you might wait a little longer before the music comes in. You might pick your moments more carefully because the audience isn't going anywhere. And I've often, there have been times when I've said to the director, I want music through the scene. I said, what if we reacted to the scene? What if we let the scene play and then the music comes in a little bit later? And so you have to, you might have slight more freedom in a film to do that, but you're still scoring. Television, you're still scoring. And I would always approach, as much as I could, the television like I'm scoring a film. It doesn't matter, it's still a film. Mm-hmm. But often you just had to create more cues.
You are in demand all the time for various projects. How do you feel, and I actually know the answer because we've talked about this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about doing multiple projects at the same time? And how do you approach doing that when you have to do it?
Yeah. I try to avoid that if I can. It's very hard. You really do need to focus, but sometimes life doesn't let that happen. And then it takes a lot of mental discipline to just keep things completely apart. I have a wonderful story I tell people. I was signed up to do 2 TV movies one time. One was going to score in February and one was going to score in October. So I said, great, no problem. So I said yes to both of them. The one in February kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. And what happened, I wound up scoring the 2 back to back. And I had no control over it. The schedules just went awry. And then when the producers of the one found out I'd scored the other one the week before, they got angry at me. How dare you take another project? I said, no, I accepted it last January. But they were still mad at me.
Yeah, but you try to avoid that.
I try to avoid that. I mean, it's not always possible, but I can, like, sometimes working on the operas, because it's over an extended period of time. I will stop working on it and go do a project. And then when I finish the project, I'll come back. But that's a different kind of thing. If I can do that, I will do that. But the film world doesn't always let you do that. I mean, sometimes the demand is there. So you do the best you can.
Many composers have their own sound. Henry Mancini, you name it. I mean, you can hear a composer, Tiomkin, Burt Bacharach,
yes, right.
and you can say, that's.
Yeah.
Do you have a sound?
Gosh, that's I don't know. Maybe I do. I don't know if I do or not. I mean, that's.
Do you try to have a sound?
I don't think about that sometimes. You know, I mean, a lot of people are telling me that the new opera I just wrote, they said, I didn't know you could write like that. I said, well, it's always there. It's just that the story now lends itself to this treatment. It's a much more contemporary rhythmic kind of, percussive piece. But so I don't know, I admired and still admire Jerry Goldsmith a lot because he could become these different composers in these different films. I'm amazed sometimes at his versatility and how he would go from one, Planet of the Apes over here to the Sand Pebbles over here.
To the Waltons?
To the Waltons. I mean, it's like, how does he do it?
How do you think he did it? You're a composer.
I think that he had the ability in his mind. He had an incredible versatility. I think, in a way, we were a lot alike. He had a lot of different musical experiences, and he knew how to delve into those wells, so to speak, and pull out certain things. I think it was very exciting what he did in a lot of cases. You think about Planet of the Apes, how inventive his score is. That's before synthesizers and everything. They had to make up those sounds. They had to create them like out of percussion. He had the guys playing on the inside of the piano, the whole thing, the prepared pianos. Now you can get a sample that's a prepared piano, so you just push a button and there it is.
Yeah.
But then they had to rig the piano. They had to put the paper in it. They had to do all this stuff. But but John Williams, I hear his music. I hear his style. I hear it. I hear it in all his scores. Mm-hmm. With a few, there's some exceptions, of course. There's some marvelous things that he's done that are not like Star Wars.
Well, no one knew who the composer was for Catch Me If You Can.
Right.
This
right.
jazz score.
And you go back earlier, some of his earlier scores, there's some marvelous scores that you would never in your wildest dreams.
The
John Williams wrote. The Reavers is one. There are many of them. Yeah.
Yeah, but isn't that what a film and television composer does?
Yes, you sort of morph yourself into whatever it is that you're doing, and that's the excitement of it. That's a lot of fun. I don't know if you remember going back to the 70s, and Heck Ramsey, he leaves Arizona and he goes to Mexico on a stagecoach. Yeah. So I started out with a very big country western cue, tip my hat to Jerome Moros, and all of a sudden, as he crosses the border, here come the guitars and the guitarrons and the trumpet, the same music, but all of a sudden it's scored differently and it becomes Mexican. That was so much fun to do, and it was fun for the players because we got to go back and forth.
Yeah. How long ago was that? In the early 70s? And
yeah.
Look at the excitement on your face just talking about it.
I still think about it. I said, how often are you going to get somebody say to write me a cue where a guy goes from Arizona to Mexico? And you say, hey, that gives me an idea.
I remember an experience playing on a film where there was a pickup truck. Mm-hmm. And you wrote this beautiful theme, and I swear you made that pickup truck seem like the most beautiful pickup truck on the planet. And I think that's where the drama comes in again, where you see something and...
But the cue there was not about the pickup truck. The cue was about the feeling that he had.
Yeah.
And that was what was important in that music, is that he really loved and loves this woman. And the music is saying he doesn't want to leave. He wants to be with her.
Mm-hmm. Kind of the way Bernard Herrmann writes, where he looks at the screen and he doesn't write what he sees. Yeah. He takes you around back into their minds and into their...
Well, I worked with some marvelous directors. We've talked about that. We talk about that sometimes, about not what you're seeing, but what you're feeling. And that's important, very important with a lot of directors. And that's what you look for sometimes. And that's what the music can do. The music, it does the same thing in opera. If you watch a Puccini opera, if you go watch Tosca, or La Boheme, he scores a lot of the action and the drama like a film composer. Nobody really notices that except me, and I've pointed it out to other people. I say, look at the way he underscores that scene with the orchestra. Yes, they're singing, or they might sing over here, but in between, the orchestra's pointing some other things out. So they, in a way, they were scoring their own operas, and I think that's very valuable lesson to go back for film composers and have a look.
So kind of what you're saying is that Puccini and Verdi would have been great film composers.
Absolutely. They would have loved this. They would have been right here. They would have been right front and center at Universal and all these places, you know.
Of all the classical composers, who do you think you would have liked to have heard write a film score?
Oh, my gosh. Well, to me, the logical ones would have been like Hector Berlioz, Richard Strauss, which, of course, Richard Strauss became not of his own doing, but his music was used for 2001 very effectively. He didn't mean it to be, but there it was, you know. What about Mozart, Elvira Madigan? Who knew that would be, one
21st Piano Concerto.
Yeah, I mean, exquisite for that movie, So I don't know. It's very hard to imagine. Yeah. But I think they would have all loved to have done this.
Just imagine Mozart writing the score for Star Wars.
Well, it would have been a very different score, I think, probably. I don't know if it would have worked. I think the fact that Williams is more in that sort of larger orchestral, brassier kind of tradition, like a Richard Strauss or Hector Berlioz, it's a good genealogy coming all the way down through Eric Korngold and then to John Williams. And that's a wonderful, I love that same genealogy. I've written my own tributes to them.
Yeah. Just a little detour back to two people that you did arrangements for. First of all, John Denver.
I was introduced to John Denver in the early 70s by Milton Oken, and he had just had his first hit with Leaving on a Jet Plane. Peter, Paul, and Mary had recorded that song. And he got signed to RCA to make records. And somewhere along in the line there, he started to really think about he wanted some orchestral elements on his records. And so fortunately for me, I came into the picture.
Did John think about it, or was it Milton Oken?
I think together. I think they thought about it together because John loved the orchestra. And John was these songs that he wrote, I kept saying to him, John, these are Americana. They're going to live on way beyond you. Some of these songs are going to be like Stephen Foster, and they'll just go on. And that's exactly what's happening to some of those songs. But John people don't give him credit, but he was a very astute writer. He was very good at melodic construction and lyrics. He played the guitar. I mean, when he played Annie's song on his 12-string guitar, he played every single note, the fingering, the descending line, everything. He did it all there. He played it beautifully. And I remember he said to me, "What do you think we should do with that song?" And I said, "That." And literally, I just had the orchestra follow those lines and then added some counter lines up top. But he was very special. He was a troubled person, but he kept his troubles at the doorstep. When he came into the studio, it was all about the music and about the singing and about the songs. And he loved the orchestra. He wanted more orchestra. When we got to Calypso, which is like this giant orchestra behind him, he was in hog heaven. He thought that was great.
Yeah, he was a very special man. And you mentioned...
Well, you worked with him too, so you
Yes.
conducted a lot of this.
I had the good fortune of you writing film music because you got busy and you said, "Would I go conduct?"
So you did.
And I did.
So it was a wonderful kind of, we kind of took care of each other. We always took care of John.
And I didn't know what Calypso was because he hadn't recorded it. He was going to do it live and then record it. And I went out somewhere and I found the scores sitting there for me. And I looked at Calypso and then I looked at the orchestra and I called you and I said, "We probably need some conga players and bongo players for this, don't we?" You said, "No, it's about a boat." Yeah. Hot August Night.
Yes.
Neil Diamond. One of the most memorable albums in recording history. But it was much more than an album. It really was a legendary musical event.
Yes.
In so many ways. Talk about that, which was a seminal moment in Neil Diamond's career.
Yeah, it was. He was having a lot of success on the record charts up to that point. But what happened with Hot August Night is the first night he stepped out on that stage.
This was at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles.
Theater in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
What is it, 1972 now we're talking?
74. 1984, I think.
Somewhere.
But it was at the Greek Theater for 1 week, and they were recording every night. Yeah.
But the moment he stepped, and I witnessed this, and you probably witnessed it too because you were in the orchestra, he became a star. The little chemical thing, whatever it is, in the universe, at that moment that he went out there, that was it. And it just went from there. And he became, I mean, we did that. That's still one of the best-selling albums ever. Still sells to this day. And it was quite something. It was quite something. No one had ever really done a concert like that before. And it started a whole raft. All the pop singers now started doing these big, elaborate productions. Look at them now. They go out with dancers and
fireworks
so much,
and everything.
Everything.
But the biggest special effect for that concert, it was all about the music. The biggest effect was the opening.
Yes.
Which...
What happened was, and again, Armin Steiner, another brilliant... The audience is sitting there, the lights dim a little bit. All of a sudden they hear a solo cello, and it's over their heads. And then they hear a viola, then they hear another cello, and then they hear violins, and it starts to fill, and all of a sudden there's this orchestra of strings playing this opening prologue, and all of a sudden the whole thing just explodes into a rhythm section, and smoke comes up, and Neil comes through the smoke. And that's the moment I'm talking about. I mean, that was in Crunchy Granola Suite. He launches into his first song. The rest, as they say, is history.
The members of the orchestra this was a whole new experience for us.
Yeah.
Because we were back on the stage, and there were like 2 garage doors closed.
Yes.
And the lights, and what they did for the effect was they started smoking up the stage before they opened the doors.
Yeah.
And the music started.
We couldn't see the music.
We're playing, looking through the music, and all of a sudden this gets going, and the doors open, and the wind blows the smoke back into our faces, and all we hear is the audience screaming.
Oh yeah, they went crazy.
And the lights and everything.
They went crazy.
Yeah.
It was quite something, but I think it's truly started the rock concert becoming much more than just the concert. It became an event.
Yeah.
And that's what it's been ever since then. Now it's like they all try to top each other.
So those singers had a great deal of trust in your instincts musically to allow you to contribute to the songs that they had written in the way you did with the orchestra. And how did you communicate to them? Did you find it easy, or was it something that you had to sort of sell them on your ideas orchestrally and arranging and all? Sometimes
it was difficult because they didn't like what they heard, and then they would grow to like it, or sometimes I would change things. John was a completely different person. John, just right from the get-go, he would like what he heard because I understood him, he understood me. It was right there. Sometimes with Diamond, I had to maybe play it a few times. But it varied from artist to artist. Some artists want to meddle and change this and change that and change this and change that. There's one song I did for Neil Diamond. We changed it maybe 10 or 15 times. And finally I said, you know what? Why don't you just finish it? You do it. I'm going home. And I started to leave the studio, and they ran after me. And they said, no, come back. I said, let's hear what you wrote originally. And I played we like that.
Do you go back and listen to the recordings that you've done for singers and listen to the arrangements? And
in some cases I do, yes. Yeah. In some cases. Now everything's on YouTube. One of my favorite Neil Diamond arrangements is Randy Newman's song, I Think It's Going to Rain Today, that I convinced Neil to record. And he did it with just very little, hardly any rhythm section, mostly orchestra. And I love that arrangement, and I love him singing it. I think it's very compelling. I wish he had done more of that. It's very striking. It's one of Randy Newman's early songs. It's a terrific song.
How do you look on the technology as how it has affected music in a way of composition specifically?
I tell all my friends, I said, the computer is not going to compose it for you. You still have to come up with the idea. It'll help you put it on paper or create it or make a demo or make a MIDI file, but you still have to come up with it up here. And that's the hardest part. Now, going from paper and pencil which I did for years. And there was a point in the 80s where I was working on a film and you had to keep rewriting the cues and you had to write it out by hand every time. And it was the same cue, but maybe now the timing's changed. I remember saying to myself, there's got to be an easier way to do this. Lo and behold, a computer comes along and the beginnings of music sequencing software. And I discovered Cubase. Hans Zimmer brought that to this country, or the early versions of it. And it's
Can
actually
you kind of do a Cubase for Dummies for a second and just...
basically what it does is you can take sound and you can you create it's like a recording. It's not really a recording, but the computer will play that sound for you. And you could either slow the tempo down or speed it up, and the computer will just process that for you and give you that sound either faster or slower or whatever without changing key. Now, what I liked about Cubase is they had a notation program that went with it. So once you created the notes that you wanted, you could then open up the score and actually put those notes into score form. And I thought, now there's an idea. Because what I envisioned was that as you worked on a film and they kept changing things, you could maybe change the tempo, or you could cut these bars out and paste it together, which you can do on a computer. It's like Word, like Microsoft Word, except now it's music. And sure enough, that's exactly what's happened. And the software has grown tremendously to the point now where you can I write an entire score. I've done my operas on the computer. I do the entire score, the entire orchestration, everything. Email it out to the copyist in the different formats that they need. They bring it into their software, and they create a score in parts. There are times when I go overseas to conduct, I don't see paper till I get there. That's the first time I see the score on paper. Up to that point, I've only seen it on the computer screens. We're all going through that now, all the composers. It also enables you can have the movie in your computer, and you can have the cue playing with the scene, and you can say, whoops, she's speaking there. I better take that French horn solo out. But which, is a fantastic tool. I think it's an incredible tool. Is it getting misused? Yes, because now everybody thinks you can just push a button and you have music. And that's what's happened a lot. And I think what we're getting now is we're getting a lot of, I don't know, there are times when I watch television, I hear the same samples on different series. They're all using the same software and the same samples. And that bothers me, because I said we should be a little more inventive than that. But
do you find creatively that as technology has advanced, that your writing has changed because of the technological opportunities you have?
I try not to rely on it too much. I try to follow my own directive in my mind of what I think the music should be. And then it's a phenomenal tool. But there are guys now writing scores. They never write anything down. It never gets to paper. It's just sound. It's just sound, that there's samples of sounds that they're creating. And that's not to say it's bad. It's very good. Some of it is very compelling and very good, and it's true to the age we live in. Mm-hmm. But what maybe separates a certain creative world is creating the music that it could stand alone if you had to, and it could stand on its own. Now, that's not to say you can't do a sound design score. That's what I call them. But it's a different kind of scoring. And there's certain ones that I absolutely love that I think are terrific, that have been done that way.
Does any project stand out in your mind as a seminal moment in your musical life and your musical career? If you could point to one project, you say, yeah, that at that point, I felt,
Probably going back to Jonathan Livingston Seagull, because that was the first time anybody said you can have all the orchestra you want, take as much time as you need.
So that was a movie with music, songs composed.
Songs by Neil Diamond, and I did the score.
And you did the score.
And God bless him, he would hand me 8 bars of a beautiful song, And then I would look at the cue sheet and I said, but Neil, it goes on for 3.5 minutes. And he'd say, oh, you'll think of something.
And it would say, make me cry.
You make me cry. But I could take that song and elaborate onto it into a score and, grow it from there. But that was a big moment for me, because what happened there was, it was really like I spread my wings and said, okay, I'm just going to do what I like to do.
What year was that?
1973.
73.
Yeah. So I spread my wings with that movie. And from that point on, I said, okay, this is what it's about. It's about really scoring and opening up. And, I think even to this day, if you listen to that score, I think it really still stands out as a very beautiful orchestral, elaboration of a film score. I think it's marvelous.
So really, the first few years of the 70s were the seminal period of your life with Universal,
Yeah.
with Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
Yeah.
Neil Diamond,
Right,
John Denver, and all of that going on.
Right. That was the
When
cauldron.
did you sleep?
I didn't. And then I was still writing my classical pieces in the midst of all of that. As you know, I wrote Scenes of Summer. I wrote the Ballet Fantasy for strings and harp. I did the violin concerto comes along not long after that. I mean, I never stopped. And I did sleep. I did it. I just somehow did it. I got it done. I don't know how I did it. It's like they asked the centipede, how do you do it? How do you walk? They say, I don't think about it. I just walk,
If you think about it, you probably trip.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like that. I don't know, to me, I tell people a funny thing, I've never really held a real job in my life. I've been writing music all my life. It's all I've ever done. And I don't know what else to do,
Did you ever think about a different career at some point early on?
I never thought about another career. There are things that I like. I love flying. I love astronomy. There's a lot of things that I like. But I knew that if you're going to be a good pilot, you have to devote a lot of time to that training and really learn the craft, the technology and everything. Same thing with astronomy. It's a very deep science. There's a lot to learn. I enjoy them, but I said, I can't take away from the music. So I've never thought about anything else. So if the music career stops, I'm in trouble.
I knew you liked flying when you would take your boys,
Yes.
and I would take my daughter. We'd get food, go down to the end of the runway at LAX and watch the planes taking off. I thought,
Right.
he likes flying.
Yeah, there is, I think most people in music like flying because there's a poetry in it. Certainly, I worked on some films that involved flying, and that poetry, that feeling is there. One of my favorite cues is in the Tuskegee Airmen when he has his first solo. I love that cue. And the director said, this is wide open. This is all yours. Just take it. And it's a great moment that when he finally realizes he can fly by himself.
That film was an important film.
Very important film. It's a marvelous film. Everybody should dig it up and watch it because it's a great part of our history. The Tuskegee Airmen were African-American flyers that were put together by the Air Force and trained, but then
During World War II.
World War II,
Yeah.
were not sent into battle because there was a feeling in the military that they weren't capable. But Eleanor Roosevelt visited the base and said, why aren't these boys over there helping us? So they wound up sending them. They became one of the most remarkable squadrons in the history of the Air Force, the Army Air Force. And Robert Markowitz, who wrote the script, took their stories, real, actual stories that he got told by the different flyers, and he put them all into this script as told by these few flyers. And everything you see in that film is a true story, but it's woven together as a story about this one character. And I really admire that about that film. And I love doing that score. That was a big moment for me, too, also, because here was flying, and here's a very beautiful, dramatic story. One of the best compliments ever paid to me as a composer was by Robert Markowitz, the director of the Tuskegee Airmen, a marvelous film. At the end of the movie, after everything they've been through, there's a moment where Lawrence Fishburne, one of the pilots, the main character of the movie, turns around and starts to walk out of the commander's office. And when he gets to the doorway, he has a line. And I had written a cue that started as he turns. And it was a very kind of bittersweet solo trumpet cue. It had the heroic side in it, but it was a little bittersweet. And the director turned to me, he said, "You know, I've taken the last line out. The cue says everything that needs to be said." That just melted me on the spot.
You said it all.
And to me, that was like, okay, that's the nicest thing anybody has said to me about my music.
There have been other nice things said.
Well, listen,
I'm sure.
like most composers, I'm very insecure. You know, I always question everything I do, and people do say nice things, but I say, well, yeah, but you know, a composer is always thinking about what can I do better, how can I better it, how can I better it. You always think that way, and it's, you know what's funny? Sometimes people say, "Oh, play that theme you wrote for that movie 30 years ago." I say, "I don't remember how to play it," because you don't sit around and play your music. You know, you're writing what you're writing. You know.
I suppose that's true, except I was doing a concert once, and doing one of the most beautiful themes that you wrote, which was the movie Splash, and it's basically a piano solo with orchestra. And I thought, who better to be the guest performer of this than the composer? So you agreed to do it.
Terror in the heart of a composer.
And so you sat down to play in front of the 2,000 people in the audience. And I noticed this strange look on your face as you were playing, and you were kind of sitting in a funny way, and it turned out that the stage crew had forgotten to lock the wheels of the piano. And not only were you having to play, but you had your leg around the leg of the piano trying to keep it from rolling.
Because it wanted to roll. The piano wanted to roll away from me. It was crazy.
It
was crazy. I'm so glad that since then you call other pianists to play, real pianists that come and do the solos, and they play them beautifully.
No, I just make sure the stage crew locks the wheels of the piano.
Oh, boy, was that embarrassing.
You've done some specific projects that have been absolutely fascinating and have called into play your experience, your creativity, your love of nature, and all that. We'll talk about three. One is the National Geographic series, and you wrote music for that series.
Yeah.
I've always said that you can make a pile of dirt look like Mount Everest. This series was so descriptive visually, and the music had to go along with that. Talk about your work on National Geographic.
Those were wonderful films to work on. You know, they're documentaries. I love working on documentaries. That is kind of a different film scoring in a way. But, for instance, The Great Whales. I mean, Nicholas Knoxon, the director, said, "Give me a great theme." He said it right up front. So that theme, The Great Whales, I love that theme. I love that piece of music. I think that really captured the sense of the whales and the swimming and all that. I thought it was wonderful.
What time period is National Geographic, by the way?
That comes in like about the mid-'70s, somewhere in there. Yeah, that period in there. I've had a long career of documentaries. I've especially my dear friend Richard Trank, the director for the Moriah films at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, has done some extremely compelling films. But I learned something. The first film I worked with him on was a film called The Long Way Home, which won an Academy Award as Best Documentary Feature in the 90s. What I made up my mind early on, I said, it's a documentary film, but it's still a human story. The music should still tell the story in a human way. And so I approached the score not cut and dry, but as an emotional piece. Since then, I think that's the way most of the documentaries are being scored. That's the way I approach them, and I think it's great. But it's a different kind of thing because the subject matters are not always beautiful.
Well, talk about the Simon Wiesenthal Center films, which obviously told the stories of one of the most tragic times in human history, and your music was called upon to capture all of that within the story of Simon Wiesenthal and all that went along with that.
Well, they're very hard films to do in a way because I find myself weeping watching the films. It's very upsetting. sometimes I can't write because I'm just too upset. So I had to calm myself down and try to say, but it's hard to see things that the way people have treated each other, and then you're trying to score that, and say something about that. It's a very difficult thing, but it has to be done. Somebody has to tell these stories because they'll go away, they'll be forgotten, and it's an amazing thing. They've done some great films. I'm very proud of that collaboration. It's about 11 films. Think about that.
Well, one of the things that struck me in watching those and also conducting some of that in concert is that incredibly fine line that the music had to walk between being emotional but not overwhelmingly so that it became like gilding the lily.
No.
And that you didn't get in the way of the human story being told.
Right. You have to walk a very fine line, and I think in that sense, a classical background is very helpful in terms of finding a balance. The balance is very key. You don't want to overplay your hand, so to speak, but yet you want to be emotional. But at the same time, you got to keep a sense of what the film is about and what the story is being told. It's a balancing act. It really is.
How did you musically and emotionally walk that fine line between telling a story of tragedy and at the same time a story of hope? Because there was hope that was shared by people even within their horrible circumstances.
Yes.
How did you go about that emotionally?
It's very, very hard because you're absolutely right. All those emotions sometimes are right there together. And the trick sometimes is putting them together in the music so that there is sometimes there's a sense of hopefulness in it. Sometimes there's a discord, there's a dissonance, there's an element of hopelessness, and you can kind of play the two off against each other. It makes for some nice scoring moments. In the end, though, I think a film like I Have Never Forgotten You, which was about Simon Wiesenthal, it's ultimately a very hopeful film in the long run. Despite everything he went through, you still, in the end, there's a ray of light at the end of the tunnel. So the music is kind of looking for that, all the way, even though there's some moments that are very, 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 some of the stories he tells just break your heart. But you try to keep your mind on that ultimate hopefulness, so to speak.
You have a great relationship with Richard Trank, having gone through these 11 films. What could he possibly tell you as you approached each film and the music, what could he tell you that you didn't already know about the circumstances and all that would help, or maybe he didn't say anything?
Well, no, he's a great music lover, and we do talk a lot about the music. It's very important to him, and he loves the live orchestra. Thank God. And he's very, very positive that way. And he will sometimes say to me, he's looking for something, a certain thing, and I'll listen to him and I'll try to make that happen. But he's also a wonderful writer. So sometimes all you have to do is listen to his words, and it just kind of tells you where you got to go. But he loves the recording sessions. He's always there, and to him it's his favorite time. He loves hearing the orchestra, and he influences me. He does influence me a little because he does tell me. Sometimes I'll ask him questions about the event or what happened, and he'll tell me. He knows a lot of history. He's extremely well read, and he'll tell me about things, and that sometimes gives me ideas. Sometimes he wants something ethnic, something from the period, so I'll go back and look for something specific. I have a great story, though. We worked on a film called Unlikely Heroes, and one of the heroes was one of the Vishnu partisans, and there was an old Russian song that the partisans sang as a protest during the Second World War. They would sing it in the forest, and they always sang the same song. And Rick said to me, everybody uses that song in their movie about the Patriots. I wonder if there's another song that we could use. So I went hunting, and I had to go to record stores because that stuff is not on YouTube. And I did find an old recording of these Partisan songs. There were 10 songs, and the famous one was there, but I found this one other one that I thought was great. So I took it to Rick. I said, "What do you think of this?" And I played. That's perfect. So I did wonderful variations on it for this sequence. And it worked magically well. And, he spurred that because he said, now, fast forward to the film festival in Mexico City where he sent me, he was busy in filming in Europe. He said, "Why don't you go? You speak Spanish. You can talk to them." So they were screening the film, and I did a Q&A after the film. First question from the audience, a woman stands up and says, "Why didn't you use the famous song?" And she was angry.
Well, what did you say to her?
I explained to her that we love that song, but it had been overused. We were trying to find something new to use. And we think the one we found was particularly good and really lent itself to some really good orchestral cues. She wouldn't buy it. She was angry.
You didn't say, when you do your film, you can use that song.
No, I didn't say that. But, you can't please everybody,
It does show the awareness of an audience
Yes.
for the music in a film,
Yeah,
even the smallest moment.
Absolutely. Well, what do you do?
So, going from those films, which were and remain some wonderful films and incredibly emotional, some other very emotional films about the Olympic Games,
Oh, yes.
for which you wrote some extraordinary music.
Well, Bud Greenspan became a good friend. He was a marvelous filmmaker. He made some tremendous films about the Olympics. 16 Days of Glory about the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984. It's a marvelous film. And that's the first score I did for him. He was the first person, the first director, and I'm saying this to our director too. He got the idea when Edwin Moses ran the what was it, the 100-meter dash or whatever it was, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
He was the first person that had the other camera aimed at Edwin Moses' wife and filmed her reaction to the entire race. So he played, and this was all done live.
The human factor.
So he films the race, and then he plays you how she reacted to it. It was a superb moment. Superb. Guess what? Ever since then, everybody uses it. NBC took that idea and killed it. They even have a film on the cat now. How did the cat react to the race, or how did the dog? They what was a simple, beautiful idea on his part as a director has been mashed to death by people after that. Yeah. But that was what he was. He was very innovative. He would find certain sports people and do stories about them, whether they won or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not about whether you won or lost. It was about that you participated. So it had a lot to do with that inner courage, and that's what he wanted from the music. Now, granted, you're writing music for people running. It's like, yeah, okay, and, but you just had to find that kind of rhythmic sense or sense of courage, a sense of endurance was part of it. It was always fun. It was always fun to work for him. He was, again, another classical music nut. He would point to things. But he came to me on 16 Days of Glory. He said, when Rome was liberated in 1943 by the Allies, Toscanini gave a concert in celebration where he did Verdi's Hymn to the Nations, which is a piece that Verdi had written back in the 1800s. He said, I want to do that again. And so we said, okay. So we thought about that, and then suddenly we said, and in that, the original Verdi piece is the English anthem, the Italian anthem, and I think the French. That's it, just the three. I came back to him and I said, what if we had the anthems of all the countries that participated? He just about fell off his chair. So we did that. We incorporated all that. I took the Verdi work, and then I added all this other stuff, which is the hymns of these. And then we ended with the Verdi, and then I kind of elaborated on it. And somehow we talked through Miltok, and we got Placido Domingo involved to sing the tenor part, because it calls for tenor and choir. and we had the London, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and Chorus, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic. It was about a 9-minute piece of just sheer glory and just ecstatic. It was great.
Yeah. Well, the Olympic Games bring about all sorts of emotion, and for a composer to write music for that kind of drama, the human drama, as it's said on the wide world of sports, the human drama, the agony of defeat, the ecstasy of victory.
Well, it's great.
And in the 84 Games, 16 Days of Glory, one of the greatest moments that I recall with the music was the women's marathon runner who was last.
Yes.
Everybody had finished in the Coliseum, the LA Coliseum, and she came in last.
Right.
Barely could walk.
Right.
And she walked and limped around with a doctor next to her, coming to the finish line, and 100,000 people in the stadium for the person who finished last were on their feet.
Yes. Well,
I happened to be there, all of us crying and cheering at this, and to be able to write music for that kind of moment.
In a way, the moment is so powerful. The music can be simple. It can just be whatever, because the moment is powerful to begin with. So the music is just there to maybe, a little bit underneath. I remember Henry Mancini saying to me once, I asked him some advice. He said, what do you think I should do with this film? He said, just put a little glue to hold the scenes together. That was very
Was
funny.
that the Blake Edwards film you did?
Yes, it
Talk
was.
about Blake Edwards.
I'm the only composer who ever worked with Blake Edwards. Not the only film that Hank Mancini didn't do.
Right.
And that was Mickey and Maude. It was a marvelous film, and Blake was he. I wrote the theme. I made a demo for him. I sent it to him. He said it's perfect. That was it. He came to the session when I first started with the orchestra. He listened to the first cue. He said, wonderful, and he left.
How often does that happen?
How often does that happen?
As in, never.
But it was Hank recommended me because Hank was in London scoring another movie. So he said, Lee should do this. And Blake listened to him. Thank you, Hank, wherever you are.
What a tribute.
I appreciated it. Appreciated it. A very generous and kind and smart and wonderful composer.
One of the great people.
Yes.
So talk about your thoughts about the musicians, about musicians in general, but also especially about the studio musicians that have played a part in bringing your music to life.
The musicians are a miracle. They truly are. I remember when I was first coming to LA working, and I found it in New York too. The talent was extraordinary. There were extraordinary people around, and you had to find yourself a good contractor who knew how to put an orchestra together for you, kind of knew your approach to music, and they knew what musicians might fit you better than others. But every now and then you'd say to them, I need this kind of a player, I need this kind of a player. But they were wizards at finding the right people. And I got to tell you, like I said, when I first came out here and I met the Wrecking Crew, I marveled at them, And then the orchestra players, they could play anything. They could play anything. It was unbelievable what they couldn't play. And you could make changes, and they would play it. There was a movie called Dead Man Don't Wear Plaid. It was a Miklos Rocha score. They took all his old film noir scores and they put them together in the Steve Martin movie. He hurt his back a week before.
Miklos Rocha.
Yeah, did. Yes. Right before the sessions.
So Miklos Rocha, the composer of music for Ben-Hur.
Right. Legendary. Legend.
Yeah.
And no click tracks, no computers, nothing. You just had to conduct. You had a clock and your baton and the score. So they knew that I could do that because I'd done that a few of those. So they grabbed me. I sat with his scores and the movie playing it and got used to the timings. And I'm telling you, you had to do things like you were coming up to a cut and he would have an accelerando. So you'd be bum 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 bum, and you had to be there on the cut. You do this all the time. You know this. It was a great experience. Well, Carl Reiner was the director, and everything was wonderful. There was a scene where Steve Martin's kind of walking down the street going into this bar, and Carl was like, I wish the cue was a little jazzier. It's just a little dark, a little dour right now. Oh my gosh, I'm not the composer of this film, by the way.
And the 10-year-old boy who, among the first films he saw, was Ben-Hur, is now faced with saying, am I going to rewrite music of this legend?
I'm thinking about this, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It hit me. I looked over at that wonderful pianist, Mike Lang, who was over there, and I looked over here, and I forget the bass player, but I might have been Chuck DeMonico, great string bass player, but also good
great
rhythm
jazz player. Sure.
Jazz players.
Yeah.
I said, here's what we're going to do, guys. Chuck, the bass line that's written, you're going to play, the bassists play it, but you're going to walk it. Dun, 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 dun. You're going to walk the line that's written. And Mike, you're going to grab a few of those chords and just kind of add a little. We did that. And all of a sudden, this serious dum dum dim, dum 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 dim. Carl Reiner was ecstatic. I didn't change anything. I didn't change Mr. Rocha's score. I just had a few bumps added to it.
You were like a chef adding a little seasoning to the master chef's
But you know what?
stew.
It's not a compliment to me. What it's a compliment to is that these players did it on the first take. I said it. They knew what I meant. They knew what to do. They took care of it. That's magical. You cannot. I don't care what it costs. There's nothing like that. And the fact that it was live is even more incredible. There was no overdubbing. It was just right there, right now.
So as a composer, to be sitting there writing the music when you've been writing music, and to not have to even think about whether the music that you're writing can be played, that's never a consideration.
No, you know it can be. Well, listen, if you write something that the instrument can't play, they'll attempt it and they'll do it, but if you want the instrument to sound good, you need to write for the instrument. But the thing is that it's going to get played exquisitely, and it usually does, and it's what's fantastic about that whole thing. I have a great story.
Is this Sam's story?
Well, it's the end of that cue in Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Okay.
You were there.
Okay.
So at the end of this 5-minute flying sequence, the Seagull going through and big 88-piece orchestra sawing away and everything, we get to the end and we play the beautiful Dear Father song with just strings. It was a really beautiful song that Neil wrote. And I had kind of reorchestrated it to be very Mozartian with the inversions and everything. And it comes down to the end, and it's ending on a C major chord at a dissolve where the seagull dies. And right on that beautiful, gorgeous C major chord, purely diatonic all the way top to bottom by the strings, I had the French horn play an F sharp and sustain it. Vince DeRosa, exquisite playing. He hit that F sharp so beautifully, and it took your breath away. The orchestra literally took a deep breath after that. And we were like, wow. And all of a sudden the door opens.
From the booth.
From the booth, and out comes himself, and he says, Lee, I think there's a wrong note on the end. I thought the orchestra was going to pass out on the spot. I said, well, so much for Stravinsky and 20th century music out the window. But it was a great moment. He made me change it to a G, which is not as, that solitary French horn F sharp held impeccably, and he held it piano. He held it softly, and for a long time was something else.
Why do I get the feeling you want to call Mr. Diamond and say, we've got to go back to that F sharp?
I would like to call him and say, Neil, we got to go back to that F sharp. It was a great moment, but look, whatever. It was his film. It's his movie. That's fine. But the truth of the matter is what it tells you is how incredible these players are.
Yeah, I will say, from my point of view and the point of view of every musician in the studios that I've ever worked with that has worked with you, that you have always had the ultimate respect for the musicians. You're one of those people, when you get on the stand, when it's your music, they respect you. Not only that, they want to do everything they can to fulfill your vision. That is the general feeling of every player, and I know that you felt that. But, well, go ahead, comment on it.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. I care a lot about the players. I really do. I think they're incredible. And I'm not just saying just in our country. I've worked in a lot of different countries, and I'm flabbergasted by the professionalism and the ability by players around the world. It takes a lot to be a great player. It takes a lot of dedication. It's not always the most lucrative business to be in, as we all know. But gosh, their hearts, they're in it. They're in it for life.
Yeah. But that has not stopped you from having some rather fun moments, such as
yes,
when you decided that one of the great viola players, Sam Bogosian.
Oh, poor Sam. I adored Sam, but Sam was such a nervous wreck.
He was nervous, but he was an amazing player. But you decided to...
I played a little joke on him.
Play a little joke.
Probably wasn't very nice.
Talk about your joke with Sam.
Well,
because those of us in the orchestra...
Yeah. It had been pointed out to me that Sam always would come in and look through the books to see if he had any solos.
Right.
He always checked to make sure, and we saw this ritual at every session. He would come in. He was a wonderful player. He'd been in the Cleveland Orchestra. He came from a tremendous background. But everybody commented about that. And so I played a little joke one time. I got this part that was like ridiculous and covered it up black with notes all over the place. Impossible runs and scales, unplayable, and wrote viola solo on it. And we stuck it in the back of his book.
And the word went around the orchestra.
Everybody knew it.
Keep your eye on Sam.
So Sam comes sauntering in, and he goes over and he starts going through, and that's not, all of a sudden, he stops. His eyes go like this. And all of a sudden, you see sweat come out his, and he's looking at this, and he's put it up, and he's got his viola on, he's looking at it. And he's just, I didn't have the heart. I went over and I said, I put my arms to Sam. It's a joke. Don't take it personally.
Everybody in the room knew what was happening. And I'll tell you.
To his grace, he laughed about it too.
But that's the reaction that players had and have to you. Being able to trust you enough to know that you care about them 100%.
Well, I apologized to him. I said, Sam, I should have never done that. He said, oh, no, it was very funny. He said, I enjoyed it. I said, you're a great player. No one will ever take that away from you. And I respect you. And okay, I pulled your leg a little bit. I said, you can get even with me anytime you want. You just let me know when you're ready.
That really was one of the great moments.
Oh, that was funny.
So a few miscellaneous questions. Just, first of all, if you, and I know you speak with young composers all the time. If you could give
advice. What do you mean young?
They're all younger now. If you could give advice, or when you give advice to a young film composer, what are two or three, important bits of advice that you would give them?
Well, the biggest thing that I see missing from a lot of young composers is the education. I think they need to spend more time on the literature and the training and the technique. I think it would help them immensely. Even if they think they're just a MIDI composer and they're just an electronic composer, they should still know how it works. I remember going into a dance studio once where a guy was mixing a dance record. And Robert Irving was with me. We looked at the guy and said, do you know what that chord is? And he said, no. He was making a whole long dance record. He had no idea what key he was in or anything, You should know where it comes from. You got to understand how it works. It's not that crazy. It's a beautiful thing, actually, if you know how harmonies work and why an inversion works. And, I remember turning to a composer and saying, why don't you use more common tones in your modulations? He had no clue what I was talking about. And I felt badly for him because I said, it's such a simple device that you could use. It's so effective. But I think the training is important. Now, if you have talent, and if you're really good at what you do, that craft will give you additional strength to do what you're doing, you know. And most of the composers that have risen to greatness have a background. They have a background, and it's important.
True or false? You can teach technique, but you cannot teach creativity.
No, you cannot teach creativity. Absolutely. Technique is like showing you how to use the tools. These are the tools. This is what you do. And if you break the rules, you know why you're breaking them. You know what you're doing to make it work. And it's not a bad thing to have. But creativity is something you're either born with or not. I don't know where that comes from. I look upwards and say, thank you. I don't know where you sent me that tune, but it's a good one. Thank you. Every now and then, you get a little sort of leaf dropped on you and say, okay, here's something.
You've been honored with all sorts of awards and nominations during your career, Emmy Awards, all sorts of things. Talk about your feelings about the significance of awards in the creative world.
Oh, it's funny. They don't really have anything to do with each other. It's very nice to get the pat on the back. It's very nice someone says, we like what you did. But their creativity is in a world by itself. There's no awards there. The only award is you think you've done what you think you should do, and that's the best you can hope for. I'll tell you a funny story. Do you remember they had the Ace Cable Awards? They went away for a while. I got nominated for some show for an Ace Cable Award, and they had a cocktail party at a restaurant in Beverly Hills. So I went it was for the nominees. There was nobody from the industry there. It was just the nominees. We were all standing around like, well, is there like a host, or is there is there someone that's going to show up and say thank you very much? Nobody. It was just like, go have some drinks on us, and we'll see you at the party. It was very strange. But the other thing that would get to me, and I was very fortunate with the Emmys. I won a few and I got nominated a lot of times. But what would happen with the technical awards with the Emmys, the music was always at the very end. So after what was like a 4-hour night, you would finally get to the music awards. Everybody was totally drunk. Half the audience had left.
Right.
And now here come the music awards. And
you got to make a speech.
Yeah, and you get to make a speech, and people are like, oh. I was always so funny. So I always used to say, the good news is you've been nominated. The bad news is you have to go to the party. But it's a great honor. I mean, listen, it's wonderful to receive those things, but it really, at the end of the day, it's about the work. That's all that really matters. It's really all that matters is the work that's out there. That's all.
So let's talk about the work as it relates to your Emmy Award experience. Moonlighting.
It was a marvelous series. I remember I got the script for the 2-hour pilot, and I read it, and I laughed through the script. I said, this is a wonderful script. The original producer wrote it. He was a writer. And
what year would this have been?
About 86, 7,
Mid-80s.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
Okay.
So Glenn Caron, the producer and writer of Moonlighting, the original series and the 2-hour pilot episode, had written this absolutely wonderful, funny, clever script, which I really adored. And by the way, anybody can see the original 2-hour movie. It's available all over the place. But he had based it on a film called His Girl Friday with Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant. It's a marvelous film. These two people care about each other, but they're at each other's throats constantly, and they're in great competition with one another. And that to him was the model for Moonlighting. And it was an amazing bit of history, so to speak. It was wonderful, but I was worried that it might be a very sophisticated, but I said, this will be a lot of fun. I went in to see him, and he said, Sybil Shepherd's going to play the woman. He said, we don't have our male star yet, but we start shooting in a week. And I was like, what? Anyway, he said, look, I've got a good budget from ABC. I want you to write 5 themes, your impression of the script, and I'll pay for a recording session, 35 men, bring me the 5 themes. So I went home and wrote 5 themes. And I had 4 that I had written. And the night before the session, I said, I still need a 5th one, but I don't have it. I don't have it. I don't have it. I don't have it. I don't know. I was going crazy. Now I'm sitting at the piano. It's like midnight. It's like 1 a.m. I don't have this theme. I don't have this theme. And I've got to orchestrate to do the whole thing. I suddenly remembered that he said he loved Al Jarreau. So I suddenly sat down at the piano and said, I'm going to write an Al Jarreau kind of tune. And that was Moonlighting. So I wrote these, that was the 5th theme. So I did a quick orchestration. We went to Western Studios at night. The next night, we recorded all 5 themes. I sent him a cassette. And the Moonlighting one that became famous was the 3rd cut in the cassette. And he said, I like the themes, but I especially like the 3rd one. He said, let's use that one. And that was
it.
Then he came to me and he said, I want to turn it into a song. He said, I know these 2 kids in New York who write lyrics. I said, hold on. I said, you said Al Jarreau is your favorite singer? He said, I love Al Jarreau. He said, what if I got him to write the lyrics and sing the song? He said, oh, we'll never get him. I said, just bear with me, you know. Meanwhile, they found Bruce Willis. They found this was a guy who was a bartender who came off the street and auditioned for them, and he saw something in him. And he said, I'm casting this guy. ABC, I thought they were going to take him to the chopping block. They were going to say, are you kidding? You're hiring a guy off the street to play a lead. The rest, as they say, is history, because they read the scene together, him and Sybil Shepherd. He saw the spark of chemistry. That was it. So, meanwhile, I'm chasing Al Jarreau for 3 months. The series was supposed to premiere, I think, in March or maybe April, I think, and coming towards the end of the season. And Al Jarreau was very typical of the record business. He was a sweet man, wonderfully talented man. Oh, I'm going to tour to Brazil. I don't have time to think about it right now. Oh, I'm singing. I'm going to, I have to be in Europe next. I said, Al, listen to the tape and write a lyric. Listen to the tape, write a lyric. Yeah, I'll get to it. A week before the show was to air. By then, the producer was strangling himself. I said, hang in there with me. It's the record business. It's a different world from the TV business. Guess what? Al came in with a lyric. I thought the lyric was wonderful. He came over to the house. We ran it through. I hired a rhythm section, another 5 more miraculous musicians who walked in a studio on a Wednesday night. We cut a track. We put Al's voice on it. We got it to the producer. It aired the following Tuesday night. There was the song. And we knew we had something. The song was, I thought, worked great with the show. The producer loved it. I went to Warner Brothers and I said, when the show became a hit the following fall, I said, there's 40 million people in America watching this show. Let's get a record out. Oh, no, we don't do records of TV shows. So it took 2 years to finally get that to happen. But when it came out, it did very well, And it's kind of a classic since then. But I was very lucky with that, I swear. But I got to tell you, that was like living on the edge of a cliff, trying to get Al into the studio to record. But we did it.
But how much of it is really luck? When you said to him, look, that's the record business, it'll be okay. You were bringing all of your experience from the record business, the film business, composing, etc. Plus you knew that you had the trust of Al Jarreau.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really luck. It's basically using everything that you had accumulated for that moment in time.
Yeah. I mean, it could have not worked. Al could have gone off to some place but I think the fact that we actually got him to sing that song was perfect for that show. And that match of him and his lyric and my song, my tune, I think it really worked, the ambience, and it became the signature of that show. It was a wonderful moment. Yeah. If you go back to the 2-hour pilot, the whole last 3 minutes of the pilot is that song, and the full length of the song. It's great. But that was a very nice thing that happened. It really was.
You've written a lot of music about stories of fantasy, Wizards and Warriors, Beastmaster. Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, boy.
Beauty and the Beast, Emmy Award.
2 Emmy Awards.
2 Emmy Awards.
Yeah. Listen, I got a call from my agent one day, and she said, they're doing this series based on Beauty and the Beast, the original Jean Cocteau film, but it's set in the underneath the city of New York. And I was like, what? They're doing what? That's your first reaction. Well, go see them. Go have a meeting with them. So I went and had a meeting with them. There were 2 writers. one was Ron Koslow, and the other one was George R.R. Martin. They were the original writers of this show. Does that last name ring a bell? And they had written this pilot. They had I think Ron wrote the pilot, and I read the script. It was beautiful. It was exquisite. I mean, the writing, I got to tell you, to this day, if you go back and look at those episodes, the writing is absolutely classic. And I said, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I want something very classic, very beautiful, you know." And he said something to me that was very valuable. He said, "When they're underneath, it's safe, but when they go up top, it's dangerous." So he said, "You show me that contrast in the music." And that was it. That set the series. Now, the bad news was they needed to record in 5 days when they signed me. So I had 5 days to do 25 minutes of music. And I sat down with the film and I started working on it, and I could not come up with a theme. So I wrote one of the chase scenes, and then I wrote one of the suspense scenes, but I could not come up with a theme. I couldn't come up with a theme. I was having like the terrible time. I said, "Okay, this is the end of my career. I'm done. I'm finished. They're going to throw me away. They're going to say, go back, wherever you came from." I was looking at, like, maybe a day or two before the session, I looked at this one scene, and it's a scene where Linda Hamilton leaves the beast after she's been with him, after she's healed and recovered from her accident. She starts to walk out from down below up to the street, and there's a open brick wall, and there's a shaft of light coming through it. And they had shot it beautifully. She turned and she walks towards that shaft of light. And I looked at that, I said, maybe a nice lonely oboe solo, and I started playing the theme, and there it was. But I did it so fast that I didn't have time to enjoy it. So when I got to the session, I thought, okay, I'm finished. They're gonna, but they loved it. So, and it was very beneficial for me because I did win 2 Emmys for that series. It was great. It was all music. The music was a big part of it. They had poetry in it. They had Ron Perlman reciting poetry, and they wanted music underneath it. So you had to write these beautiful, quiet, elegant pieces that went with the poetry. It's a marvelous show. It's well worth to go back and look at. And Martin also wrote several episodes, too. They're beautifully written. And you can see the styles of the writing. There's a little bit of it, the Game of Thrones. You can see some of that in there.
Lots of opportunities for composers to write music to accompany drama. And one of those is daytime drama, which has been a big part of television in America, very successfully, and lots of wonderful stories and some tremendous acting. And you were part of one of those series. Talk about your work in daytime drama.
Well, I was asked by the producer of One Life to Live to write a theme for that series. I had done a TV movie for her, and she loved what I did. She said, I'm taking over the series. I'm going to be the new producer. I want you to write me a theme. So I did write a theme. They used it for, I don't know, 10 years, something, a long time. And it's a different world, It's done literally. They do it as they go. It's amazing. I don't know how they do it. They write and they film and they edit and it's like it's ongoing. It's a completely different process. In television series, they spend time finishing the show and then they put it on the air. In daytime, it's just instantaneous. Now, there's not so much daytime anymore. It's kind of gone away. But I think at one time it was a very, very big part of television. And mainly, I had a couple of friends in New York who did most of the scores, but I would contribute themes to them. And once in a while, they would use themes for different things. So it was a lot of fun. Every now and then I would go to New York and we would do a orchestral session where they would build a library, so to speak, that they would use. But the editors really, literally, as the picture's being edited, they're putting the music and they're doing it all there and it's going on the air. It's amazing how that all happens so fast.
Yeah. Having to do 1 hour of television a day, every day, 5 days a week.
Unbelievable, isn't it? It's unbelievable.
Not to mention what the actors have to
Yeah.
memorize overnight.
I know, but soap operas were a huge resource for new actors and people that came along. A lot of people came out of that.
Mhm.
A lot of wonderful actors that you see now. That was their training and their background, and they learned to be really good at what they did because they had to do it quickly. Again,
Yeah.
So again, there was no time.
Talk about animation. You've written music for animated films. Talk about what that was like. If there's a difference between that and live action, or
I'm a big admirer of Carl Stalling. I mean, I love the old Warner Brothers cartoons. I thought they were just, the scores are gems, and how those players played, switched tempos so fast. And, I don't think they had click tracks or whatever they did. They did something. They just would just play and then switch. Amazing stuff. But nowadays, animation's a different thing. It's pretty much computerized. And so it exists there. You write to it. You write to it like a film. It's still a story. It's still characters. It's still the timings don't change. They're locked. So the question is, how much do you highlight with the music or not? And that's a choice that's made by the people you're working for. Some people want everything to be highlighted. Some people don't want everything to be highlighted. But if you think of the old Warner Brothers cartoons, everything was highlighted by the orchestra. It pointed everything out. But then I think the tendency was to move away from that as time in the modern day, and the cartoon scores are different. The animated scores, I should say, are different than they were then.
do you think there's life elsewhere other than on planet Earth?
I think it's possible. I think the odds are very much in favor of that. Who knows? I don't think you should. I learned this from my dad, being a scientist. He said, everything is possible. You have to ask every single question and keep every possibility open, because the minute you say, oh, that's not the case, you'll be proven wrong. The universe will say, oh, yeah?
You wrote a beautiful piece called Elegy.
There was a series I was doing at Universal back in the famous days. And it was a cue in the movie, and the guy had lost someone, the main character, and he goes into a church to pray for that person. And I wrote a little cue in there, nice little piece, little viola, cello, solo thing with the harp, and had a slight kind of vaguely Baroque feeling to it, but not much, but just a little bit. And it was a nice cue, and we recorded it along with maybe another 20, 30 minutes of music. And two string players in the orchestra, you were in the orchestra too, but you might remember them, came up to me and said, we love that cue. Why don't you turn it into something longer, a piece? We're doing a chamber concert in Glendale in a month. We'll play it. So I love that. Being an old string player, I said, oh, yeah, this is right up my alley. So I expanded the piece, Elegy for Harp and Strings, and they played it. They performed it. It was beautiful. It worked out well. Fast forward, you conducted it with the Nuremberg Symphony with a recording. And that recording is gorgeous and spectacular. I don't know how you got it out of that orchestra, but you did.
I just followed them.
Yeah, it was a beautiful thing. And
Thank you.
It sort of grew from there. Brian Boitano later skated to it, and that sort of brought some attention to the piece. Recently, all these orchestras, a lot of school orchestras have been performing the piece. I get emails all the time. Who knew that a little cue I wrote in 1976 would grow into something like this? But that happens sometimes. And so it's had a life of its own, and now it's out there. It's thanks to you, to your recording.
Well, thank you. As has a great deal of your music. Your music is performed in concert all over the world, and it's not just the film music, but your two-part Hymns Triumphant, which is a glorious piece.
Yeah.
The Elegy, so much other music that is out there for orchestras to play. How do you feel about the life of your music going into the concert hall?
Well, I love that. I really do love that. I like I love it when the film music gets played, and I love it when the concert pieces get played. That's very exciting to me to see that. And it's beginning to sort of happen more. It happens sometimes that way. It takes a while sometimes for things to get found, but lately the violin concerto had a few performances, then it was in a lull for a while, but lately it's surfaced again. All of a sudden people are interested in, and I've had some contacts saying they want to perform it, which I'm very excited about. So it's very heartwarming to have that happen. It really is, you know. But I also love it, you know, like you've played Splash, you know, you've played The Great Whales, you've played the East of Eden, which is, you know, that theme is one of my most performed themes. You know, the American hymn, or it's known as the song in the American hymn, or the theme from East of Eden. That thing is played all over the world. Michelle Kwan skated to it in the 90s. David Copperfield did a flying video to it. Everybody has done that piece, and that piece goes everywhere. And I just had the other day two young singers turn to me and say, "You wrote that? We sing it all the time." I would say, "Well, why don't you look up on the sheet music? My name is there." No, I didn't say that. But that's the thing, is you get these surprises all the time.
Are you able to step back far enough to say, wait a minute, this piece was just performed on the other side of the planet?
Yeah. I'm amazed at all that, and I think our digital age is enabling more and more people to hear things and find things that they want to play. I think that's very exciting. Look, let's be real. They're not my pieces. They came from someplace. I don't know where they came from. I was fortunate enough to kind of be there to help them get on paper or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, I don't know that I own those things, you know? It's just, it's a fortune that you're given, a gift that you're given. It's all it is. And you're just fortunate enough to be a part of it. I don't know what happens. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how they arrive here, but they just do every now and then.
Let's talk about your conducting for a second, because you are a terrific conductor. Orchestras, you know, love playing for you. Talk about your conducting. If you enjoy it, if it's something that...
I do enjoy it. It's a little nerve-wracking. I'm not very good about getting out in front of an audience. I mean, I don't know how you do it. You do it. You're smooth as butter when you go out and talk in front of these orchestras and conduct. I get like cold sweat and all that kind of stuff. But I do enjoy it. I love it. Preferably if I'm doing something that I wrote or that I know, you know. But Henry Lasker, we're going back. He's the one that taught me. And the first time he let me conduct the high school orchestra, we kept getting slower and slower and slower and slower and slower. And I said, "Henry, what am I doing wrong?" He said, "Okay." So then I learned from him a little bit. But, and I was fortunate when I was in New York studying. I worked at Lincoln Center at nights as an usher to support myself. I watched all the great conductors, you know, I mean, Bernstein was there, Zell was there, Barbaroli was there. They were all there, different times conducting. Sometimes you heard them do the same piece. And going back to Ugo Mariani, conducting the Borodin Second Symphony and singing all the missing parts, really came to appreciate what they do and how they mold things and how they make things happen. And I watched them. I watched what they did. I looked at their little tricks and I said, "Oh, I see what he's doing. I see what he's..." And that's kind of how you learn. Conducting is a very funny thing. You know, you've studied it. They can give you sort of technique, but you have to kind of adapt it to your own situation. And everybody looks different, you know. I mean, a little short guy conducting or a big tall guy conducting, they're going to have different movements.
But you also establish a relationship very quickly between yourself and the musicians.
Yes, yes.
And if there's
Absolutely.
a relationship of trust and respect and admiration, then that is the best possible jumping off point. And that's what you have established with the orchestras that you've conducted.
Well, I do feel that I need to respect what they do. You know, the only area you might have a problem sometimes if there's a discipline thing, and sometimes the best orchestras might get a little unruly at times.
I hear the word is that you really don't like musicians using their cell phones during a recording session.
Oh my gosh, that is one of the worst things. Oh gosh, but you see that more often nowadays. But I feel is like supreme disrespect. You know. I don't mind
Not
you
just
trying
to you,
no, to anybody,
and to the music,
to the people around
and
you,
to your colleagues. Absolutely.
I don't mind you trying to get another gig. I think that's great, but do it out there. You know.
So, what haven't you done in your career that you would like to do? And this is a toughie because you've pretty much done everything.
I don't know. You know, I mean, there's always more mountains to climb. You know, I'm always thinking about what can I do next. You know. What I like doing is maybe writing for something specific, like maybe a soloist that I know about, or an orchestra that I know about, or a film or something. It's nice to have that challenge put in front of you. But every now and then I just sit down and write something for myself, you know. It's just, you don't stop. I don't stop. You know, there's always like, it could be better. It could be, maybe we'll try this. Maybe we'll try this. And I keep hoping that I get asked to do something that I haven't been done before. So it's like a whole brand new challenge. You know, stepping into the opera world was a big mountain to climb because I realized, oh my gosh, we're dealing with such history. But eventually you figure out, stop looking behind you. You just got to look forward and deal with what you're dealing with and just do what you do and see if it kind of works out. I think it has kind of a little bit.
So, Lee, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, that's almost an impossible question to answer. I have no clue. I really don't. I just tried to do the best I could. That's all. You know, I love writing music. I've written music. Hopefully people like it. Maybe they don't like it. Maybe they like it. Doesn't matter. I've done it. And there it is.
And the good news about composers is they're remembered through their music. So they're always there.
Yeah. Well, I always think about Bach, you know. He wasn't celebrated in his time. Telemann was. Everybody went on and on about Telemann. They said, Bach, his music is interesting. If you read some of the early reviews, that's what they said. Boy, things changed.
Well, on behalf of everyone who loves your music and everyone at the Film Music Foundation and the Television Academy, thank you for all you've given us in your career. It's been extraordinary. Lots more to come. But thank you most of all for being the kind of person that exemplifies someone that is a really good man and happens to be a brilliant composer.
Well, that's very nice of you to say that. Thank you very much. I think you need to keep perspective about the fact that, you know, you're an artist and it's a journey and there's a lot of brilliant people around and you need to respect them.
And you're one of them.
Well, who knows?
Thanks, Lee.